Hello, everyone. What do you do when you have multiple passions? Well, if you're brave and motivated enough, just like Davis DeWitt, you combine them. He is the perfect example of someone that managed to successfully build a career in special effect engineering for the film and TV industry in the US. He cleverly combines technology with artistic creativity to blow the viewers away and make cool stuff happen on the screen. We are very grateful to have him here at CCC Congress today. Enough talking from me. I will now let Davis share some real-world practical cases with us so that we can learn more on how exactly he makes all this magic happen. Davis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you guys so much for having me. This is actually my first Congress, so I'm really excited to be here. And one of my favorite things is to talk about combining the things that I love to do, as she so kindly put. Just a little bit of background. I'm a practical effects engineer to kind of narrow down into what that looks like. That means you have kind of a large umbrella of what happens in the special effects world. Practical effects being things that you can touch, not CGI, not computer-generated images. These are real things. So just kind of a little bit of background there. And so my career started in camera department. So I wanted to get into film and TV. And how do you get into film and TV? Well, you grab a camera. So I started pointing cameras at things from an early age and really enjoyed it. But there was one thing missing. And that was I missed making things with my hands. I missed having the tangible aspect to what we do. Because when you wrap a day of filming, you don't have anything to show for it. We stopped shooting on physical celluloid for the most part. So that was what something that I wanted to get back into. And so I started transitioning into practical effects. And I got really, really lucky. I got brought in to work on the reboot of Mythbusters, which was Motor Mythbusters. And so it was a lot of working on cars, doing all kinds of builds. It was a dream come true. And best of all, we got to blow things up. So this used to be an 1981 Cadillac Eldorado before we put a lot of TNT in the boot and then blew it up. So as you can imagine, this was kind of the perfect scenario where I got to combine all the things that I really, really loved. And this is how I cut my teeth. This is how I really learned a lot about the practical effects world and then combining that with film. Because this is engineering and it's art kind of brought together. I know it doesn't look like art, but destruction can be art in a way too. So let's talk about the first build that I did, and this is kind of where I learned the first aspect of building for film, and this is pure function. So this is arguably, I would say, the most important build of my career. This was a 1997 Dodge pickup truck that needed to be made fully remote control with a nitrous system. So the myth we were testing was trailer sway, and that is if you are driving and you have a trailer hooked up behind whatever it is that you're piloting, if you load your trailer incorrectly, it will start to fishtail. It'll start to wag back and forth because you have, the weight is in the wrong spot on the trailer. So we wanted to test this. We made some scale models. We made some little prototypes. But at the end of the day, this is television. We have to do it for real. And our insurance company is like, well, you're not going to put a person in that. So we needed to make it completely remote control. So I had some requirements. I had very little money. I had very little time to do it, and best of all, you couldn't kill anyone, so that was kind of a good thing to keep in mind. But this is how it works in film and TV, is normally you have a very strict set of requirements. It needs to, perform to these levels. We just need to get, usable shots. We need to be able to test this myth scientifically, but we don't have a lot of time to do it. We don't have a lot of budget for it, so you need to be able to, figure it out and be scrappy about it to make this happen. And I wasn't really qualified to do this. I came from a background of, again, making movies, doing fun little Arduino projects. So it was say yes first, figure out how to do it later. And so this was kind of just a quick breakdown of what we were looking at. And we had a way to control the throttle, a way to control the brakes, steering, and then what you don't actually see in here is that we also had a way to control the load of the trailer so that you could move the load from where it's supposed to be to where it's not supposed to be during the drive in order to cause the trailer sway. And the one system that also isn't on here either is we also had a nitrous system. And if you ever played a video game with driving, you've probably seen those nitrous buttons. You press it and you go faster. So that was the idea, is that when you have when you have trailer sway, can you accelerate out of it? Because the way you're supposed to get rid of it is you slow down. But we want to see if you accelerated, could you pull it straight? It's like pulling on a slack line. Could you pull it taut? And then again, this is where it comes in handy with having the remote control system because we wanted to be able to do this with nobody in the car if something went wrong. So again, really quick overview. This is what I scrapped together. This is what $500 in parts got me and whatever was lying around the shop. So an Arduino Nano, some PWM controllers, some relays, and our nitrous tank. And I used a wheelchair motor as the steering wheel motor. So again, just whatever would work, whatever we could make work. And I had some time to prepare it before, but I didn't have time to actually test the system before we were shooting. So day of filming, I had an hour to install all of this in the car, and we just had to go for it. So this is more of the, again, figure it out as you're doing it sort of a thing. And it didn't need to be perfect. We just needed this to work once, and we needed to be able to get the data we needed, and then we moved on. This is not a permanent system. It's going to get ripped out and thrown away as soon as we're done. And so, of course, it was time to test our myth. And originally, I wasn't supposed to be the one driving it. It was going to be one of the other hosts that was driving it. And again, nobody had tested this. So he went out. He had trouble like keeping it in a straight line. He's like, all right, you try it. So I put it right down the middle of the runway. He's like, cool, you're going to do it on the day, which was terrifying. This is the most stressed I'd ever been. We only had 3 runs to do because we were running out of daylight. So we did the first run, didn't have enough trailer sway. We did the second run, had too much trailer sway, so we weren't able to get the results we needed. And we had one final try. It was beginning to get dark. We had one last shot. We went for it. We got the data we needed. If you want to see how it actually went, you can watch the full episode. But I was hooked immediately. I was like, this is what I want to do. This is building for TV with, this is the functionality of making something happen and getting the results at the end of the day. So then came the next build that I got to do. So you saw what it looks like when you have purely function. That RC truck, purely function. We needed to be able to test something. It didn't have to look good. This next build that I got, this was for a movie, and the producers called me and they said, listen, I know you build robots. What if you made cute robots? And I said, okay, keep talking. And they had a character in a movie, and again, if you've seen Star Wars, you know what it looks like when you have a robot character. You have a small, cute little guy that, is the sidekick to your main character. And they're there for comedic relief. They're there to kind of be the emotional rock of our main character. And that was a similar thing here. This is getting into purely form over function. There's not a lot of things going on technically with this robot. It's more about asking ourselves some really interesting questions on how do we design something to evoke emotion. And that was kind of the really fun part of this process for me. And this is where we get into my favorite part of doing builds like this, which is not looking at the individual disciplines like filmmaking and engineering, but looking at the intersection of those two. What happens at the intersection of those? And that is where we learn the most. So it starts with a sketch and it starts with a script. And for projects like this, again, I'm not being given a list of functions. You think of robotics building in a commercial environment or an industrial environment. Very specific, we want this, we want this, we want this. This was more of a, we don't really know what we want the robot to look like, but we know what we want the robot to feel like, which sounds like a silly thing to talk about, but it's so important when what you're selling is emotion. So first step, read through every single page of the script. Figure out what are the emotional beats in this movie, what are the things that the robot is going to do, what are the relationships the robot has with the people around them, why does the robot do what it does? These are the most important questions that we're asking ourselves before we even start writing a single line of code. This is what allows us to really get to the root of it, and these are some really interesting questions that when it comes time to design for, how many of you have had to design something where the first question on your mind was, what is the emotion that this item evokes? It doesn't happen much, so it's a cool question to ask. And then you start talking with your team and you figure out, okay, what do we really want this to look like? Let's start refining in on the actual look of this. Now that we know kind of the overarching ideas, let's narrow this in. And one of the most important parts of the build process is recognizing if you can't do something, ask for help. I'm a terrible illustrator. You saw the last sketch. I can't illustrate to save my life. But we had people on our team who could. And so that was kind of the idea here is talk with the director and talk with the producers and figure out, okay, now let's start to refine the idea of this robot and figure out exactly what we want it to look like. And again, asking those interesting questions like, where is the visual weight of this robot that we're building? Where do the eyes naturally fall? Do we want it to have a humanoid face? Do we want it to have a kind of an abstract-looking face? Again, questions that have nothing to do with the function of this robot and everything to do with how humans are going to perceive it on screen. And then we start to fill in the gaps a little bit more. We get our color scheme. We figure out, do we want this robot to look really clean? Do we want it to look a little bit more rugged, a little bit more worn out? And again, figuring out, OK, let's look at this as an ingredient in the whole. This entire movie is a bunch of different individual parts that come together, so let's think of the whole system. So for example, there's no mouth on this robot. There's no mouth that moves. And what this allows us to do is in post-production, if we realize, oh, we actually want the robot to say a different line, well, now we can have any line that we want read from the robot. We can plug plot holes by just merely cutting to a shot of the robot and then re-recording the audio. So again, problem solving in kind of a unique way, which is thinking about things that are come up later, thinking about them early on, and then figuring out how we can kind of work around that and still have a compelling character. And again, other things like, again, face from a logistical perspective, it's much easier to have something that doesn't have a lot of moving parts. But trying to find that balance of too many moving parts, it kind of begins to lose some of the charm in a simple design. Too little, and it doesn't do anything. And so then we jump into CAD. And this is the part that probably a lot of you are very familiar with, which is, OK, let's start designing things in the digital world so that we can start making physical, tangible things. And CAD is great, and 3D printing is great in film, because if you ever want to do anything again, you already have the files for it. So if they ever want to shoot a sequel, we don't have to hunt down, and this happens a lot with older movies, they have to hunt down old props that were made by one person, one time in, I don't know, the 70s. So now, for the rest of eternity, as long as these files exist, they can recreate this robot, which is helpful to production companies. And from there, again, electronics, a lot of you have experience with this part, very, very simple stuff. What I'm focused, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. I'm not trying to create an innovative technical product. I'm trying to just get us the base level of functions that we're looking for. So again, off-the-shelf components. What's really important here is that if this robot stops working when we're filming, everything shuts down, everything stops. So I cannot be the single fulcrum for which this production rests. So I'm bringing, again, you have to have backups, you have to have, abilities to fix things, and off-the-shelf components are great. I mean, most people here could probably design a PCB for this. That's great, but if you need to be able to just go down to, go on Amazon and buy something next day, I want to be able to swap out components really, really easily if something breaks. And actually, while filming, we did have a couple things that ended up breaking and had to be swapped out. Cost us 5 minutes instead of having to shut down production for a week while we have to retool things. So again, unlike the RC truck that you saw, this is not a life or death situation. If that RC truck went out of control, somebody might get hurt. Nobody's going to get hurt if this robot, falls over or something like that. And again, we're only shooting for like a month or so, so this is not a long-term solution. But once the electronics are done, then we get into, again, more of the fun parts of this build, which is thinking about how does this robot exist in the universe? And more specifically, what is the life that this robot has lived? Oops, 2 for 2. And so what's really important is that we add some character to this robot through weathering. And you'll see this on almost all props. Everything that has existed in this physical world will show some signs of wear. So it's usually a really good indicator. And you'll notice this in movies, like almost all the props, look like they've existed for a while. That's like a dead giveaway if something's brand shiny and new and the character is supposed to have used it for a while. It doesn't look right. So thinking about where is where going to occur in the real world, and then replicating that. Again, I don't have 2 years to be able to put this robot through, a bunch of real world wear and tear, so I just have to recreate it in my workshop. And again, thinking about this from a emotion perspective. If something's brand new and shiny, it just looks like a product. If something has some wear on it, it adds some character to it. It gives us a little bit more to connect with because we ourselves are not perfect. So it gives us something to relate to in that way, which sounds corny, but it's true. A great example. Who do you think the good guy is and who do you think the bad guy is in this movie? You do not have to have seen this movie, but thinking of the character design, one of these is shiny, sleek, and the other one has some miles on it. Again, we've all existed in this world. We all have some miles on us. So being able to relate to that, again, it sounds silly, but it's true in a lot. You start looking at character design and you start to notice these things over time, getting back to the idea of asking the interesting questions about the projects that you're building. So we got our electronics, we have our shell, time to cram everything in there. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect. We're only filming for like 3 weeks maybe. And this way I can open it up, rip out any component that breaks, and put it back in place. Everything that you see here is not being used for its originally intended purpose. This is where the hardware hacking really comes in, and thinking about the larger picture and figuring out what are the different components that are not being used for what they're supposed to be, and how can I modify them to do what I want. Thinking about this is kind of getting to the end of your design process and then working your way backwards to find the pieces that you need. And did I mention I had to make 2 of them? You can imagine how long it took to make one of them, and then I had to make an identical twin. So one is none, and like I said, you have to have extra components, but you also have to have an entire extra robot. So we had basically a stunt double. So in movies, your main actor has a stunt double. Well, we needed the same, because he's a main character. He needs to have his own stunt double. So this way, if something goes wrong, we can replace him, but also, too, we have something that our characters can run around with and hold and carry that isn't going to shake up internals, things like that. And again, this is why doing everything in 3D printing in CAD is so great, because I have an exact replica now. I don't have to source specific parts and try and find them again. I can just use something that I've already created. And then this is what it looks like on set. So this was my setup. I had a little music stand with my script. Sometimes I had a video monitor on there, and then my remote control. And so I'm juggling a lot of different tasks here. I'm having to recite lines. I'm having to read as this character. I'm also having to control all of the motions of it. And then we also have blocking. And blocking in film is basically how characters move throughout the scene. And it's very premeditated, which is important because I have marks to hit. I have very specific spots I need to be at very specific times in the script. So again, juggling a lot of different things. On larger productions, you'll have multiple people operating the different components. But again, this is just me. And what I'm thinking about here is not the pure functions of this, but thinking about, okay, what is the relationship of this robot with this kid in the script, and how is the robot going to change his behavior based off of that? How am I going to move this robot in a way that conveys how that robot feels about a person? It's a weird way to think about it, but these are kind of the things that when you look at it on screen, you'll notice this. And this is, again, getting back to those different questions that we're asking for ourselves. And one of my favorite parts of this was the way that I knew I was doing a good job is because in between takes, the director would come over and would talk to the robot and go, okay, actually, can we get you to roll over here? And would not talk to me. So I'd be like, hi, I'm actually the one controlling your robot. So I knew something was going right because that was what was happening on set. And also, actors appreciate being able to talk to a real thing. That's where that practical effects comes in. They don't want to talk to a tennis ball on a stick. They want to be able to interact with a real object. It's so much easier to act when you have something to act with. And then again, this is what it looks like, when we're filming it. Unfortunately, I don't have clips to show you because I don't own the intellectual property for it. But these are just some behind-the-scene clips. And again, going back to thinking of think of the object as part of a whole. I have to talk with our director of photography, with our gaffer. How does, thinking about how light reflects off of the object you're building. We can't have a lot of reflections because then you're going to see the camera. All the lights on that robot had to be calibrated in to match the settings our camera was shooting on. You can't just arbitrarily throw an LED in there. You have to talk with your camera department and figure out what that is going to look like. So again, thinking of all these different parts inside of the whole. And the nice thing is, unlike with that remote control truck from Mythbusters, we have CGI to fill in the gaps. Like I talked about, this is form over function. So what's most important is how we're performing on set, and if we have to fill in some gaps later on down the line, we have CGI for that if we have to. Oop. And everybody loved it. And this robot, everybody loved the robot. He was a big hit on set. But if you can get the people who you're making the movie with to fall in love with your robot, that's usually a pretty good sign because it means the audience is too. And that's really where the fun of this comes from, and that's what I love about this. So the movie will be out soon, so stay tuned on that. But what I want to talk about now is what happens when you combine those two things. What happens when you have something functional and something that still needs to be on screen in a way that we're disguising it. So for this one, I was brought in for a very specific scene on a movie that my friend was making. And it was essentially we need the bad guys are breaking in and they throw a smoke grenade, and we need it to roll up and land on a very specific mark. So this goes back to what I talked about earlier, where you have blocking, and that's where the actors stand and when. So I had a very specific mark, and you can't just roll a grenade and have it land on the exact same spot every time, because if you're doing multiple takes, you have your lights set up in a very specific way. You need to be able to replicate this every single time where it rolls up and then stops. And you get better at what you do by doing harder things. So I said, well, I want to make a remote control version of this. Nobody's ever done it before. This sounds like fun. So again, the idea being, we have our smoke grenades. So I did a lot of research. Probably ended up on a list or two looking up the number of grenades that I did. But just trying to figure out, OK, what do we want it to look like? Talking with the director, reading the script, all these different things to figure out how we're going to make this work. And again, we have CGI to supplement at the end of the day. So again, jumping back into CAD, if we want to replicate this at any point, we can. That's the fun part of this. And the idea being it kind of works like a hamster ball. You put a hamster inside of the hamster ball, he runs around, and the entire ball moves. That's the concept that we're using here, is that there's two motors, and they're going to drive little gears that are on the inside of the lid, which you can see here. And so when the motors move back and forth, the entire grenade rolls back and forth, but there's nothing on the outside to give that away. It just looks like it's rolling as if somebody threw it. And it took a few tries. I went through a couple different prototypes to figure out what will work for this. Again, there's not like an instruction manual. There's not documentation out there for this. This is just throwing stuff at the wall and see what works. And then for the actual smoke portion, turn to a vape cartridge. So this is like an e-vape. And I wanted to build my own, but unfortunately, again, you never have any time to do what you want. So I just got this store-bought unit, or this pre-made unit that has just a little air pump and then a vape cartridge. The idea being we have smoke coming out of the grenade, and then we can augment that further if we need to, but it functions as it should on set. And that's the important part. And then again, electronics, nothing crazy here, and that's always the goal. We want something that is, easily replaceable. All these components are off the shelf. I can swap them out. Eventually, if I want to make this like a product for filmmakers, we can. I can make a custom PCB. But for now, all this I can just easily replicate, make multiples of, and then we can troubleshoot on set if we have to. It's all about tiny form factor, so that's what I'm trying to get, is something small and fast and cheap. And that's the finished product of that inside carriage, that piece that goes inside of the grenade. So again, nothing here is being used for what its originally intended purpose is. And that's what makes this so much fun, is taking these ideas, coming up with a technically innovative product, and then completely disguising it to make it look like it's just a normal thing. That's really where the magic of this comes in. So as you see, we have our little fan there. We have our hot glued vape cartridge, and it's just going to be blowing out that smoke at the top of the grenade. And then we have the batteries down below to keep that center of gravity for like a pendulum effect. So then comes the fun part, which is where we decorate this. Our director didn't want to use any text that matched any existing military hardware. Again, we're creating a universe in this film, so we might as well go all the way down the line and create, a new set of ideas, a new set of products, a new set of everything. So this is kind of where we come up with our own decals and stuff like that. And of course, we're going to age everything. So we want it to look like it's real. We want it to look like it's been in this world. So it's always painful to spend all this time getting a really nice paint job and then thrashing it up with some Dremels and some solvents and stuff to make it look like it's existed for a while. And then the result is a grenade that you can drive. You can make it roll back and forth and go wherever you want it. It can't steer left and right, because in reality, if you're going to roll something, it's not going to start curving one way. It's going to go the direction you rolled it. So that's what we're trying to replicate here. But again, at the push of a button, you have something that will roll around and blow smoke. And it was so much fun to make this because, again, nobody's going to know what this is if you watch it on screen. Now, it is large. But that's for two reasons. One, again, I don't have a lot of time to miniaturize this stuff all the way down, so you kind of have to get what you get. And two, when you're shooting inserts in film, that is like a really close-up shot, it helps to have a larger scale of something. So if you've ever watched Lord of the Rings, a lot of the close-ups of that, of the ring are made with a 3-foot diameter ring. Like, it was huge. That was how they shot those inserts. So it's the same idea, is that you can play with scale. We don't have to remain true to the world. We have to remain true to the camera. That's the only thing that matters. On screen, it's the only thing that matters, is how it looks. And so eventually we combine these things. And this is, again, kind of thinking of the fun part of this of, all right, so we have film, we have TV, we have all the, the practical side of this. But at the end of the day, if you're not taking these ideas and using them to create your own projects, what are you doing? This is where the really fun stuff happens. So this was like a recent personal project that I wanted to do, of kind of combining the idea of making something that has the look for film, but has the functionality of something that hasn't existed before, and we're just creating something fun here. So, it shoots these little individual condiment packets of jelly and jam, and at the end of the day, you do all your CAD work, and at the end of the day, nothing compares to the sheer thrill of blowing up toast for the first time. Probably one of my favorite things that I've ever built, but it comes back to these same ideas that I've been talking about. The fun projects, the projects that really put a smile on your face, the projects where you really learn the most, are at the intersections of what you're already good at. thinking about what are the things that I do, what are the things that I'm good at and enjoy, and then what happens when you start drawing lines between those. That's where you're going to really learn the most. And also, again, you're going to be better at what you do if you can increase the number of angles you're able to approach a problem. So once you've found those intersection points, where are we going to go to approach these new problems in ways that we haven't before? I've learned so much doing all of these builds that you would never learn in an engineering class. You would only be able to learn it by doing it by hand. So again, think of the problems that you're working on, think of the angles that you've approached them with so far, and think about the new ways, the new questions you can ask that you haven't before that will cause you to kind of find those breakthrough points. That being said, I really appreciate you guys coming to this talk. I have deeper dives on all of my builds on YouTube. I do shoot videos of all these builds if you want. And then feel free to be around at the conference if you guys have any specific questions. I believe we have a little bit of time for Q&A if they want. I think we have like 5 minutes. But thank you all so much for coming to this talk. You guys want to do Q&A?
Hello, hello. That was very interesting. Thanks so much, Davis. Now we have some time for some Q&A session. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. We will pass through a mic so you can ask it. Anyone?
Question in the back?
Stop.
Oh, you're asking if the Canon was open source? Yeah, so I have all the files available for that on my website. You can download them. Again, go nuts if you want. For some of the other projects, they're not open source only because it was a contracted thing, and part of the contracts of that is that I'm doing work for this production company and that I'm not releasing it into the world. They own the IP of those. But for the projects that I do on my own, yeah, I release those out and like, here, go nuts, do whatever you want. Next question.
Do you do the hardware design, soldering code, everything yourself, or do you collaborate with others on those projects?
As I like to say, I'm full stack. So I do design, programming, painting, 3D, all of that stuff. Really where I bring people in is kind of what I showed you earlier on like the illustration point. I fall more towards the engineering side. Even though a lot of what I do is artistic at heart, I still want to be able to have a very clear roadmap of where I'm going. So like with Newt, the robot, we figured out exactly what we want him to look like before I started building anything. So that's what I find the most helpful, is that I'm not doing necessarily all of the narrative creative work. I'm just bringing it into the real world. Next question.
We had a question at the back, somewhere there.
What's the best way of weathering 3D printed props that you have found?
The best way to what with 3D printed props?
For weathering, for wearing down, showing age.
Weathering.
Oh, weathering, yes. So kind of what I talked about earlier, where you think about how is this item going to exist in the real world? What's the wear that would naturally occur to this? So for example, with Newt, we have those 2 large wheels. In reality, the wheels are probably going to rub against the case at some point. So adding some like tread marks there. So just really, because again, you'll notice sometimes people when they're doing weathering, they'll just like arbitrarily weather the whole thing. It's thinking about, no, where is weathering going to actually occur on this in the real world? And then replicating that with a Dremel, like literally using sandpaper or an abrasive or solvents. If something's going to leak grease, put grease on there. Make the grease run down where it would go. Stuff like that. Another question over there? Yep.
Wait a minute for the mic to come. It's underway.
Hey, I was just wondering, do you got any formal education regarding the whole thing, or you just taught yourself?
I originally went to school for computer engineering, and then I was like, I don't want to make money when I grow up. I want to be a starving artist. So I did 1 semester of computer engineering. I was like, get me out of here, and left, and then went to basically graduated with like a liberal arts degree. But I will make a point there, because a lot of people ask like, oh, making props is really cool. I'm an engineer. How do I get into that? And I would say, yes, you do need the technical background, but I would say all the prop masters that I've worked with, all the people that do a lot of this, other people that do this for a living, have a more important background, which is a background in theater or film or something where, again, it goes back to what I'm saying, where we're thinking about the emotion of the object first. there's always somebody that can do the engineering work. There will always be an engineer that can sit down and do that. But if you don't have experience in a theater or making movies, that would be kind of the missing link that I would recommend people who want to do more of this get into and try and learn about, again, what happens when you you tweak these things and then point a camera at it. What is the new emotion that you're getting there? So to better answer your question, pretty much all self-taught, but with that crucial link being coming from a background of, the liberal arts side of things and then just picking up, the knowledge doesn't care where you got it, so you can pick up the engineering part later. Any other questions? Yes.
I guess I'm just curious how you just even got into film. So were you making things and then people sought you out?
Yes, and I will say the biggest thing there, I'm very lucky. There's very few people that do what I do, so that kind of acts as like its own advertising. But the one thing that was hard for me to learn but eventually helped is nobody will know what to hire you for if they don't see you doing it. So whether or not you like social media, if that's a way that you're going to get clients, you kind of have to play the game. So it's all relationship based in the film industry, in that who you worked with last is probably going to be who's going to get you your next job. So just building up and putting out your work and showing people what you do, and making sure that you have a niche, something that really only you can do, helps as well. Because I think of all the writers, directors, and actors I know. It doesn't help narrow it down, but the number of people that do builds like this, I have a short list of people that I can call to work on stuff like that. So just making sure that people see what you're doing, that you're working with the people that also do that, you become a resource in that community, and just kind of making sure that you're putting yourself in front of those opportunities, if that makes sense. Yes, and a lot of, again, on film, it's more of like, oh, what do you do, and how can I do more of that? You can always ask people, again, of like, what's the best way to get into this world? What's the best way to get into this world? And when you're working with the people who are on set and can do that, they'd be like, yeah, let me help you out. You're in camera department now, but on the next job, I'll bring you on as special effects or whatever, and so you can see what that looks like. But yeah, just kind of literally introducing yourself to those people and saying, hey, I want to do what you do, teach me. And they go, okay. Any other questions? I don't know how we are on time. Oh, whoops. Somewhere?
Anyone a question?
Cool. If that's the case, thank you guys so much. I'll be around if you have any additional questions you want to ask, but thank you again so much. This has been such a pleasure.